Hello and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on a Friday evening. And I think there are very few Fridays on which it is possible to have. So I know it is a bad situation out there, but somehow let's try and make the best out of it. We have like fantastic panelists here. Before I go to the panel, a very quick introduction about myself and about the session. My name is Praveen. I work and lead a CSF strategy work, and I've been working with Central Sphere Foundation, which is a philanthropic foundation working on school education for about 6 years now. Given that this is the last session for the day, I thought what it might be useful for it to be like visualized as a kind of a summary panel for the discussion that we are having throughout the day. So if some of you who've attended other sessions would have talked about how, right from Ashish and Rukmini's session to talk about like high level macro issues related to COVID, to thinking very deeply about how teachers, how organizations are responding to it. I thought this might be a panel where we could almost consolidate all of that learning and have the leadership of some of the most prominent not-for-profits talk a little bit about how are they thinking about this entire unprecedented situation affecting the ecosystem that they work in. So for example, how is it affecting their projects? How is it affecting the kind of work that they're doing in the communities? So that's at one level. Moving from there to a little bit talking about organization as a whole and internal. It is a challenging time for the not-for-profit sector. How are some of these leaders managing both that transition as well as uncertainty? And then I would want to ask them a little bit about, at a personal level, how are they trying to keep sane, guiding, navigating, managing the entire organization, if at all that is possible? So that is like a frame for discussion. And I'm delighted to have a wonderful panel. Let me very quickly introduce them. I have with me Sujata Sahu. She is the founder of 17,000 Feet with a mission to transforming lives in rural Ladakh. She has also been instrumental in helping shape their education strategy. And I must say an organization with probably the most scenic place to like work with. So welcome Sujata.
Thank you.
We also have Sourav Banerjee. Sourav is the country director for Room to Read, one of the most prominent not-for-profits working on the issue of literacy and girls' education. Welcome, Sourav. And finally, the third panelist for the day, we have Maharshi Vaishnav from Educate Girls. Educate Girls, as you know, is focused on improving outcomes for the girl child. So with this, let me very, very quickly go to the first panelist. And again, in no particular order, so maybe we can start with you, Sujata. Sujata, as you think about how COVID-19 is impacting your external organization, okay? You talk about say the projects that you were working on. How are you just dealing with it? Could you just give the entire people, the ecosystem which is watching, a little bit of a frame about how 17,000 Feet is trying to deal with this external situation?
Okay, cool. First of all, this is a great forum. Thanks to the Nudge and CSF and Dell Foundation for having this. So yeah, I work in Scenic Ladakh, and the not so scenic part of it is that Ladakh is actually extremely rural and remote. 90% of it is rural. We don't have the infrastructure that most of the other urban or even some of the other rural areas can claim. So I possibly work in the areas which have absolutely no roads, no electricity, no connectivity. So you can just imagine how tough our work is. So in general, most of our projects involve going to the villages. So we work with about 220 very remote villages across Ladakh. And as the name itself suggests, 17,000 feet, we're going to work with villages which are absolutely inaccessible and across high mountain terrain. So having given you a bit of the background about how Ladakh is, so two of the main projects that we do is we want to transform the lives of people who live in these communities so they don't have to migrate. And one of the core reasons for their migration is education. So there is a government school in every single village of Ladakh. And it doesn't matter even if there's 50 children or 20, there is a government school there, which is a fantastic thing. But the problem is that communities or parents usually feel that the government school isn't good enough, and for obvious reasons. So they tend to migrate. So most of our work revolves around going to the school, improving infrastructure, talking to the communities, training teachers, working with the government on policies and procedures that they can implement. So things were going fine. We even digitized quite a few schools, but provided solar electricity, and we were said, okay, we managed to digitize 120 schools in such a remote area. And that was quite a big achievement, and along comes COVID. So, and like you rightly said, it has disrupted pretty much everything. And I think I won't be alone when I say that it has disrupted our work to the largest level. So if you look at now physically going to the schools, like I said, there's no other way for us to do much. We physically go to the school. That has been disrupted in a large way. We can't do much by way of, so most of our infrastructure projects, our teacher training projects have been come down to a standstill. Even our community workshops that we do are at a standstill. And you have to understand there isn't even telephone connectivity in these areas. So everybody talking about EdTech and mobile and SMS and WhatsApp, it's a far cry. So, but having said this, there, like you all know, the schools have stopped. So, but there's no other way but to go back and look at how can we still continue to support the communities that we work in. And they are facing issues. One is interrupted education. And there are other as well. They're also dealing with cases of COVID, which could potentially reach their villages. So few initiatives that we're working on right now is, so we've been working with teachers, those that have access to WhatsApp. And these are the teachers who would have come in possibly to the cities before COVID started. And I have to also say one more thing. The one more unique thing about Ladakh is Ladakh schools have been shut since December. So they're looking at a loss of education now already for 5.5 months and potentially 3 more. So many teachers in the cities, we've been working with them, suggesting lessons and lesson plans in which that they can even work temporarily with maybe the 20 or 30% of students who have access to this. We're also working a very fantastic initiative. We've realized that education, we can't rely on EdTech. We can't rely on digital. There's no electricity in all these villages. So the one thing that the teachers, specifically in Kargil district, have done is we are working to create video lessons, I'm sorry. And this is, and they're doing a fantastic job of it. So what 17,000 feet has done is we've regularized the whole thing, tried to put it into a good framework in which, see, whenever schools open, they will have access to these videos in whatever form, maybe in their TV, on a pen drive, or for those people who are online. But as of now, there are a mix of initiatives going on, but EdTech's not working completely. It's not going to work. But that said, these teacher communities are creating an asset base of hundreds of videos in various languages, and it is in the local dialect, so it helps the child learn quite a bit. We're also, the other thing is, of course, our communities are severely affected. So we're now putting together a massive outreach program. Our schools are not prepared for this outbreak. So one of the early things we decided is education may be disrupted, but we have to prepare for the future. And I say future, I mean short-term future and the long-term. We see a lot of changes happening. But while doing so, we also are helping the community in their immediate needs, where we working with the administration and health supplies and hygiene supplies and so on. So that's basically a little bit of what we are doing.
So thanks, Sujata. Like very comprehensively, like laid it out, etc. Let me go over to Sourav. Sourav, like Room to Read runs some of the largest programs on early learning in the country, for example. Like, how are you dealing with, for example, like say this tremendous disruption in the external environment? We know the governments are struggling with trying to like make sense of like what to do, what not to do. So if you could give a little bit about like how have Room to Read's plans external with the governments across the country like been affected because of this, and what are you doing to mitigate that?
Sorry, I was muted. So thank you for giving the opportunity, and thank you, Praveen, for raising this question. So as you rightly said, Room to Read has been largely working on the early grade literacy space and the girls' education space. And as an organization, we are not really an organization who were very tech focused in that way. Most of our programs were like in the school with the teacher, with the family, that kind of program. So it was a very very close interaction with the community teacher, and especially focused on the school. So obviously, when this COVID thing struck, it was a big challenge because the schools closed out and all our activities were actually in the school. So So we kind of, for the first few days, I would admit that we were quite at a loss that what is to be done now if the schools are now closed. But thankfully, Room to Read, also being a big organization, has a certain amount of resilience. So I think there was one track of Room to Read which was already working on a digitization plan of how you kind of digitize a lot of products that we offer to the school. So what we did was we kind of fast tracked that. So a lot. So post COVID, what happened? There was one section of our staff and program team who was working on fast tracking the digitization efforts. So that included things like, digitizing our storybooks so that they can be accessible over video, over television, over WhatsApp and whatnot. Developing audio capsules, audio lessons, which can be transmitted over the radio. We are using community radio also at certain places. Also looking at on the girls' education space, we developed life skill lessons which can be transmitted to the girls over either a phone or a digital platform. So a part of the team was on that. The other part of the team was more working towards disseminating these products over various channels. So obviously, the first option was governments, and you're right that a lot of the governments have been very proactive in getting their act together. And I was just hearing Lokesh Yadav talking in the other panel, and a state like MP for or UP. I mean, the way they have just turned around, got their act together is phenomenal. And so they have, and Chhattisgarh also. I mean, they have activated various WhatsApp channels right down to the parent level. So in a way, it kind of helped our work because then you could ride on to those channels and disseminate your program. But at the same time, there were cases where there were not adequate channels available. Like Uttarakhand is a case where we had to rely on the community radio because being a hilly state, network connectivity is a problem. So we focus more, and community radio, thankfully, in that state is very strong. So we took the community radio route. So the other part of our team was actually figuring out what is the best way to disseminate this content, and then kind of get to the teachers. This part of the team was also trying to get in touch with the parents, the teachers, with the regular interaction. Kya chal raha hai, how can you help you? What kind of content you read, and all of that thing, which is very necessary in this kind of situation because everyone is very confused. In the process, what we also realize, and I mean, it's not everybody realizes that tech, in spite of all its good positives, you cannot still reach everyone through tech. And, in the morning, Anurag was talking, and even in Delhi, the the reach is only about 40% of the parents have a smartphone. So forget that in many other remote states. So what we are also doing is also working on an offline package, which is basically a kind of set of self-instructional material, which the child can take home, which can be given to the child, the parent, and they can do a lot of learning at home, whether it's the early grade student or the girl student. And I think going forward, that's what I see happening, because even once the schools open, it's not going to be 100% schooling happening everywhere, because it might open up in a green zone. Tomorrow, the green zone might become a red zone, and you have to shut it off again. And so you have to go. So you have to go in this online offline mode for quite some time now. So I think that the focus now is to prepare for that eventuality going forward.
Super. Great. Thank you so much, Sourav. And also like thanks for a reality check. I think digital divide is something that like sometimes it is like, say, it becomes a blind spot for a lot of us. Let me go to the third panelist for the day, Maharshi. Again, Educate Girls is an organization which works both in school and outside school, serving some of the, like both in terms of the target segment, the girls, and also the kind of areas that it works in. How has it impacted your programs, Maharshi?
Before I begin, thanks so much for this opportunity. It's great. Congratulations to Nudge, CSF, and MSDF. It's been incredible gathering. Educate Girls, as the name suggests, we focus on enrollment, retention, learning, and life skills of girls, right? Pretty much similar to Room to Read does on the life skills side. We work in very rural, very remote, tribal, underserved villages in Rajasthan, in MP, and very recently in UP as well. We go from identifying each and every girl who's out of school, working closely with the community and the local administration to ensure that the girl is in school. Then we ensure that she doesn't drop out. And then, of course, learning and life skills set in. And for this, we have a very heavy boots on the ground kind of a presence. So each and every village has a community volunteer. And then for every 6 to 8 villages is our first paid position. And then the hierarchy builds upward. So as we speak, we are present in about 17,000 villages, and about these villages have about a little over 30,000 schools. And to take care of these villages and schools, we have about almost 1,800 employees and about 14,500 community volunteers. So we have a large setup from community outreach perspective. This, we were not prepared for this, obviously. This just hit us, out of the blue. Fortunately, however, what happened was we were in the very last fortnight of our program cycle, of our program year. The 1920 academic year was just about coming to an end. And, so was our program cycle. So we lost about 2 to 3 weeks worth of programmatic work in the field. But apart from that, the impact on us programmatically, project-wise, hasn't been very significant. Where it's making us rethink our intervention, rethink the way we deploy our resources on the ground, the way we train communities and our team members, is that we've been forced to very quickly pivot to digital. So all our field teams, anyway, we used to provide them with smartphones because our program villages and schools are geotagged, and we capture data on the field on mobile phones, etc. So that training has very quickly shifted to Zoom for business and WhatsApp for business. So it's a very smooth transition. Where we are now going to face challenges in working with communities, because as Sourav mentioned, smartphone penetration is very minimal. We had done a survey last year, and less than 20% parents, and that too male parents, so father or the elder brother would have a smartphone. So that is going to be a challenge. The second thing is our door-to-door, the census where we identify each and every out-of-school girl, that has got stalled. So our expansion in Uttar Pradesh, which was in the Bundelkhand region, the prerequisite for that was we would identify each and every girl who's out of school. So that isn't happening as we speak. But then we are hopeful that once schools or rather communities reopen, schools may reopen a little later, we will still be able to do it fairly quickly.
Sure.
So the impact has been fairly minimal as of now. However, depending on the extent of the lockdown and when schools reopen, we'll have to rethink.
Great. And thanks Banerjee, for bringing out the issue of enrollment also. I remember listening to Dr. Banerjee, Rukmini Banerjee from Pratham, and she mentioned that at some level, at a policy level, we had almost thought that the battle for enrollment is won. However, I think states would need to rethink about what is the impact, not only on the learning, which I think everyone is worried about, but also on ensuring that students enrolled in schools as well as attend regularly. And I think both are slightly separate issues, etc. And thanks to all the panelists, etc. I think you brought it wonderfully of how you are trying to deal with this massive external shock almost, etc. But if I just take a little bit of a step back as well as go a little bit internal into your organizations, how are you as leaders of these organizations? What is your decision-making framework about both on the harder stuff? We talk about financials, we talk about employee retention, we talk about what to do, what not to do, and also about softer stuff being able to do something for the community, being able to serve, about employee morale, etc. So just as leaders, of these organizations? Like, how are you even, like, say, thinking about doing it, etc., especially around the decision-making framework? So, and let me go in the reverse order. So Maharshi, maybe like if I can start with you. How's Educate Girls internally thinking and dealing with it?
So as I mentioned, we have a very large workforce in the field, right? You know, the geographies where we operate in, talent is anyway very sparse. So the ones that we have managed to get on board, ones that we have trained, are, you know, aligned on values, etc., we want to take care of them. So our priority one, immediately once the government announced the lockdown, was obviously shut all offices, but was to look after them. So within 2 days, we set up a 24/7 helpline for our employees, which basically provides physical, psychological, financial, material support to all our employees. That was the first thing that we did. Then we had our founder CEO record a video message, which was then circulated widely across WhatsApp and emails to all our employees, where we basically reassured them that they're not going to lose their jobs, they're not going to face any salary cuts, and once the the lockdown or the situation improves, then we'll be back on track. So reassuring them that they don't need to necessarily get any any more concerned. The third thing that we did, which was fairly unprecedented even by Educate Girls' standard, was immediately we so the workforce that I mentioned about, the 1,800 odd employees, out of that, a little over 1,500 actually work in the villages and are at state prescribed minimum wage plus mobile allowance plus traveling allowance, etc. So they don't necessarily make that kind very high salaries. So for all employees who make less than 20,000 a month, basically we announced a top up, an immediate top up of 5,000 rupees. So almost 1,600 employees got 5,000 in their bank accounts straight away. So we said this is the least that we could do in times of uncertainty, and take care of them. So that was on the employees side of things.
Sure.
On the community side, and because we have very deep ties with the community, and we have the coordinates of all sarpanches and ward punches,
But employees are actually, sorry, community, I actually want to go separately. I just want to keep at least this one like at an organization level. Thanks again for sharing and for being a compassionate organization. Sourav, over to you. How's Room to Rate internally dealing with it?
Sorry. Again, Room to Rate being a big organization, a kind of a global organization for what you may call it, it has both its pros and cons, I guess. On the pro side, I guess the strongest thing is that you have a certain level of resilience, as I said. I mean, there is this sense of community, this is the larger community, we are in it together. You have a huge employee base, so there are people to lean upon each other, people are kind of working together. We also have a strong people operations department. So this whole thing about there was a specific department dedicatedly working towards how to keep the people happy, how to retain their morale, how to have regular team meetings, how to have regular catch-ups with them. So that part, I think, was well taken care of, and that has not been much of a problem. But on the flip side, again, since it's a big organization, so the steam required to run the engine is also big. And these times where funding is likely to be a problem. I mean, we heard it since morning that the funding for the nonprofit sector is going to be a challenge, and it's not only this year; it's going to be years after. So that was the challenging part on how to really how to kind of cater for the future years. And I think what happened was in this process that we became very innovative, and we tried to look at, because again, similar to Educate Girls, since we were kind of certain that we are not going to kind of touch our staff and not kind of create not layoffs or losing jobs, so that is definitely not something that we are considering. So we looked inwards. So we looked at our systems, our processes, how they can be streamlined, how you can cut the flap there, how you can bring in more automation, how you can those systems more effective so that you start saving money, which then can be plowed back onto the program. So that's I would say has been our effort.
Great. Thanks a lot, Sourav. Sujata?
Yes, I'm happy to be the outlier in this group. So unlike Educate Girls in Room to Read, we are not a very large organization. We have a very large geographic presence of 60,000 square kilometers where we work in, but so our perspective is very different. So yeah, this thing took everyone by surprise, and financially, definitely we were not prepared for it. So this was something, so one of the biggest things I had to face as the leader, I think the first month was the hardest for me. I mean, we've had to take really hard decisions. It was not about letting people go as much as we had to put people on furlough. So now having to take that decision, how much will your cash flow last? And knowing very well, like Sourav just said, funding is going to become very difficult for this year, maybe until the end of next year. So we've had to take certain decisions in terms of what were the key tasks that we did not want, which were non-critical at this point. So we put a couple of those projects, administrative, like technical projects, on hold. And when it came to the people, so we had a discussion internally within the board and with the entire staff. And I'm talking of the field staff as well. So you see, the key part, I would put something a little bit differently. I think our resilience comes from the fact that because we are very small. What has happened here is we have a very small team. We're about 30 plus strong, and these are all most of them of our Ladakhis. And what has happened, we took a collective decision that yes, we have to, what is foremost, most important was that we continue to do the work and support the communities that we work in. Towards that effect, if we need to continue to do this, keeping the organization and the spirit of work alive, we took a collective decision to take pay cuts within ourselves. So, but then also the good thing that did happen that some of our funders and our board members themselves came forward, and they tried to pitch in ways in which we could help our team members. So I think the most amazing thing that I've seen in our organization is how our teams from the ground have said they will support, and they are more aware of what is likely to happen to their communities and how they are more needed than ever. They were willing to work without pay. They were willing to come in and until the organization got kicked back on its feet. The other thing we wanted to say was, the one key decision also we took in that we had to go back and look at, all right, we're working in education, we're working in community. Our digital programs, like Sourav said, though we had digitized and we have actually an offline-online solution, but it still required somebody to come into the school, but we could not execute them because everyone was stuck at home. So we had to go back to the drawing board and say, do we get into something else? I mean, do we still continue to support our communities? And that is where we took a call as to also help the government, help the local administration reach out to these communities, because that's what we're good at. We have such a deep-rooted presence. So we have now expanded programmatically, and we continue to support this, and this too shall pass. I'm quite confident of that.
Thanks, Sujata, and thanks to all the panelists. Let me just open the floor for questions, and I see there are a couple of hands. So, Nomita, if you could, let's say your questions, and ideally, what we would want to do is just collect a few questions, etc., and then go back to the panel. So, Nomita, would you go ahead with your question? Okay, I don't see a question from anyone. Are there, sorry, let me just reframe. Are there any questions? Okay, so yeah, someone asked a question that what are the future plans, 6 to months, looking like? So, and let me add a little bit on that, etc. And I think till other questions come in. If you put a little bit of a thinking hat on to what 6 to 8 months would look like, and even what this year and next year would look like, what are the things that you think would change because of COVID, and what are the things that people think would change but would return back to the normal? And let's keep it a slightly a quick question, and I'll hold you accountable to your guesses maybe after a year. So maybe Sourav, if I can start with you, what are the things which would change? What are the things which won't?
I think quite a bit would change. The school system, as we have seen till now, we would undergo quite change. At least in the short and medium term. I'm not guessing for the long term. Might be it will come back to the earlier stage. But at least in the short and medium term, I think the key change that's going to happen is you'll have less and less physical instruction time happening in the classroom. So due to social distancing, due to the fact that there will be off and on, schools will be open and closed. So that's going to be a reality at least for the next 1.5 years. And so for our 6 to 8 months plan is basically preparing for that. And as I said, I mean, so we're looking at a offline plus online kind of a package going forward. We are looking at a package which also considers that fact that teaching now is not going to happen only in the school, but also in the home. And keeping in mind the fact that child is also going to be taught at home. So parents are also to be co-opted in this process of teaching. And it's not only the teachers. So there are activities that you need to do with the parents as well as the teachers. So that would be my short answer to that.
Sure. Let me go to Maharshi, you. And there's an actually interesting question that maybe before we go into the future, say crystal gazing, etc., you could answer, which is that how do you engage a purely field-based organization? And I know Educate Girls has a large field force, etc. What are some of the ways in which you think that an organization, which is pretty professionally run and managed, etc., is able to engage with a large field force, multiple geographies, etc.?
So I would echo sort of sentiment that we'll see some drastic shifts that will happen for the near to medium term, but in the long term, I guess we'll all fall back to normalcy. On engaging with the field team, so all our field staff, as I mentioned, have Android operating system smartphones, and there's an Educate Girls app on their phones as well, preloaded. And we use it extensively to collect data and to exchange information, etc. But that alone, we realized, is not going to be enough. So therefore, we basically created smaller groups, geography-wise, function-wise, interest-wise, on Zoom on WhatsApp for Business, and then we use either WhatsApp for Business and Zoom for Business for exchanging ideas and information. But that's not all. What we have done is we have also got a mentor for our team. He's based in San Francisco, but he's great at team and team dynamics and org behavior and org culture and all. And every Thursday we have learning with Judah. I mean, his name is Judah Pollock. He's a Silicon Valley based mentor, and one of our funders was very gracious to suggest him to us in the pre-COVID times. But then we thought we'll leverage this lockdown and get him on board. So every Thursday we have a learning session with him. So, from geography, function, and interest-based smaller groups that we have created, which meet periodically every week, to, getting a mentor on board, we are keeping them engaged largely using mobile devices.
Great. And there's one, thanks, Maharshi. There's one question about, and I think Sujata, if you could take a shot at it, etc., which is to say that what are the kind of programs that you envision, let's say, morphing, which would continue in short to medium term? And what are the programs that you might want to morph from a medium term? How are you targeting about beneficiaries? So I think this goes a little bit into your decision making. I know this is slightly more particular, but say for an organization like 17,000 Feet Foundation, what is your decision making framework of how would you prioritize, let's say, A versus B versus C?
So so you see there's one thing that's happening specifically in the case of Ladakh. What's going to happen with a lot of Ladakh depends a lot on tourism, correct? So with the tourism going to take a deep hit, most of the people or parents who have migrated to the cities for education are going to move back to the villages. This is actually going to put increased pressure on the government school system as well, not just in terms of infrastructure and teacher resources, but also in terms of the learning. There's going to be a language gap, there's going to be a learning gap and so on. So interestingly for us, when we looked at our existing programs, we were anyway looking at one of our metrics for measuring how successful our program was to see where have we been able to reduce student migration from the villages into the cities. Now, because of COVID, we're seeing that it is anyway going to happen at least in the next year to 2 years. And after situations normalize, it may move again. So the need for our programs has now become even more so. So our programs still stay relevant. But the one thing that I think we need to add on, and it's a very critical need at this point, is to bring in the community involvement. We need to up this a lot more. I think Sourav had also mentioned this one, which is, you see, with so much of in time and out time in terms of the lockdown and social distancing and so on, a lot of the learning has moved into the household. We need to work a little longer and harder with the communities. We're not talking about education, but we're talking about the need for the parents to be sensitive about it for the children to learn. So I won't look at anything morphing, in my case, at least in the case of 17,000 feet, but I think what we would critically add on for sure is how do we work with communities to help them support this influx of more children into the government schools, maybe their own children from private schools to government school. It's going to be a hard transition for them. So for the next 6 to 8 months, this is what we're going to do. And with the hope to sustaining this migration. In this case, we say the migration is a good thing. So if these people have actually moved back to their villages, it's a good thing. So that is what we are going to look at.
Sure. Actually, on the migration question, there is a very interesting, let's say, question / observation by Fiona ma'am, which is like, say, migrant workers, and we've all seen both the distress migration as well as the like a heartening pictures of migrants moving back with their families. What is going to happen to education in the government schools? And again, I don't have an answer, but this is something that even I was exploring. Like most of the migrant in India is actually male migration. If you, for example, like hear people who've studied migration, like Chinmay Tumbe at IMA, most of the migration is actually not the family migration. It is the male migrants from like eastern states of India, UP, Bihar, migrating in search of jobs. How much of it is, like, for example, like floating children population? I don't think so. We collect a system level data on that. I know there are pockets of organizations which have done that. But yeah, I think this is something. And again, if some of you have any observations on the migration part, to say about how this would, for example, impact schooling going forward, like would love to have that. But I think on a system level, this is something that, like, say, we are struggling with, which is completely unprecedented. Like, because you shut down the economy and people have temporarily, and maybe in some cases for an extended period, gone back home. I don't know if some of you, I know like Mershi and Sourav, in the areas that you work in, if you are seeing something.
Yeah, I can go on that. So migration, we have been actually working on migration for some time, not due to the COVID situation. I mean, this is of course a specific different kind of a migration, but in large areas of central India, Madhya Pradesh, you have these large families migrating out to Maharashtra, to those places for job, for various other reasons. So even in our programs in Madhya Pradesh, if I may say, a large, significant part of the instruction time, the children had just migrated out. So we were anyway trying to struggle with how to deal with those children. And we were anyway thinking of having packages or kits which you can give to the children while they're migrating, so that they are at least there to minimize the learning loss, I would say. I mean, you really can't get them into full stream education systems unless the place where they're migrating to also has you have a tie-up with those governments. That's the systemic level integration. But on a programmatic level, what we were trying to see is if we can have kits that we give to the families, which will minimize the learning loss. Of course, the COVID migration is a bit different, because here you have a group of people who has just come back to the village. Now, there are various layers to that. There are various layers in the sense that, one, it would put some bit of pressure on the village school, which had probably 20 kids till now. Suddenly, it has an influx of another 20 kids. And there's only one teacher or not even a teacher. And so how do they manage that? So there's a management issue there. There's an issue of also expectations and the fact that many of these kids would probably be coming from the cities, and how they gel with the village population. There's some more sociological issues that needs to be studied and seen how that works out. Those are things I think I can envisage right now of areas that we need to work on.
No, an excellent point. I think, if like say 6 months down the line, we were to check how adaptive were our education systems, one of the criteria would be how quickly were we able to redistribute our teachers, keeping in mind the student population. Because like that's one of the toughest things to do. Maharshi, you had a quick observation, and we have 5 minutes, so maybe we'll just take one question after that. Yeah.
On the migration bit, I'll take a minute more. So, there is this tectonic shift that's happening, right? There's this reverse migration that's happening. And a lot of men are returning back to the villages. So the immediate feedback that we are getting from our village-based field team at cases of domestic violence and child abuse have significantly shot up in our villages, in our program villages, because they are back home. There's loss of employment and income streams, and also there's overall stress, and it's just getting very difficult. So we fear, it's going to get increasingly difficult for girls to return to school.
Sure, and like with this, I think let me go to the closing comments to our panelists, etc. And there, I would want you to answer two questions. Like one is, if you were to advise either policymakers, school principals, etc., about opening up the schools, how would that opening of a school look like? Like how should they, just one advice, if suppose you were to dole it out to school principals, whether those are private, public, etc., how should they think about the entire academic year or whatever would be left to it based on where we are right now? That's one. And second, as a leader, how are you managing yourself? Because again, everyone looks up to the leadership to steady the ship, as Lincoln talked about. How are you dealing with it, and how are you trying to keep safe? So yeah, we have 3 minutes. I'll just hold you to 1 minute per participant. Maybe Sujata, if you can go ahead.
Sure. My first thing would be to headmasters and teachers. So one thing I would want to say is, you go back to school, think of the child and not of the syllabus. And I think the big thing we're going to see is, if and when they open, there's going to be this mad rush to, I have to finish, because they're very stressed. The teachers are stressed and uncertain, facing uncertain times themselves. So my first thing would be that, just connect with the child, because they themselves don't know what the children have gone through. So I would say that. And how I am dealing with it, it's been stressful. Meditation. I actually started meditating. I used to do this a long time back, and I have to say my stresses have come back. So I spent some time meditating a little bit and listening to music. That helps. That helps. I look at old photographs of children in Ladakh. That really helps.
Oh, wow. Sourav?
So on the school opening, I think the advice would be, again, as I said, we work on a system whereby you almost work on a 50% capacity of instruction. So to work with the schools to kind of set a realistic set of expectations of outcomes, what you can expect in this year and the year next, and then work towards that with a, as I said, with a home plus school kind of a structure. On how, from a leadership side, I think a couple of things. One, of course, is the big change for everybody from the organization level, from the person who is working at the field level, his job has changed, to the person who is working at the country level. So I think as a leadership, it is very important for us to first accept the change, acknowledge the change, and then manage the change. So I think that's a very core part of what we are doing as the leadership. Being empathetic is part of that whole process, because acknowledging everybody is going through stress, and so how you can be by their side is to the extent possible. At a personal level, I think one of the things that I've learned during this time is the skill of multitasking. I mean, I was never very good at it. I was very concentrate on work job and then move to the next. But now, with this housework and children and work, I have now become an expert in multitasking, I would say.
Thanks, Adam. Maharshi?
So very quickly, Dr. Rukmini Banerjee mentioned something very important this morning. I'm just going to repeat that. I mean, this is a recommendation to principals. Don't worry too much about learning outcomes and curriculum or have a course khatam karna hai. Don't worry about it. Please don't take your eyes off inclusion. Varna jo ye pichle 2 decades mein jo kaam hua hai on getting children into school, it will just get undone. So let's not lose our eyes, lose our sight on the inclusion, on the enrollment ball. So that's one. On the personal front, there's so much of overload of information that's happening. Emails and WhatsApp universe and television and all. So what I have started doing, and it's only been a week now, I just lock myself in a room without gadgets, and I don't do anything. I just sit down on the floor actually here, and I don't do anything. I just sit down. That's all I do. And that's what has started having a calming effect on me.
Wow. Thank you so much. And again, like very, very unexpected and very, very different answers from all three of you. Thanks so much for like being here on the Friday evening for this wonderful discussion. Thanks for the audience. I know this was a like late Friday evening session, like for participating. I'm sorry we couldn't take all the questions, but yeah, that's it. Thanks for joining.